You have entered Roguelike Radio.
Hello and welcome to Roguelike Radio, the procedurally generated podcast where all of the participants eventually die. Joining me this week for an episode about coding practice, we have
Josh G, also known as Kyzrati, the developer of the XCOM roguelike, an ASCII editor RexPaint, and of course Cogmind.
And Nicolas Casalini, also known as DarkGod, creator of Tales of Maj'Eyal and all its superb expansions.
And I'm Mark Johnson, and I make Ultima Ratio Regum in one single 450,000 line file of code. So, seeing as we all make extremely large, long-term, many-year projects, in what ways do you try to structure how you code and what you code and what made you code in those certain ways?
I would say I try to split things as much as possible. I have I don't know, probably over 5,000 files in Tales of Maj'Eyal. The basic structure of this split was decided at the very start, in the first 2 or 3 days of the project, because I knew from the start that I wanted to make something big, even though I was not stupidly mad enough to try to make something big from the start. But I knew where I wanted to go. So I made lots of decisions that would look strange for a small project, but in the end paid off, because each time I need to find something I know it's in its little own file somewhere in the file system. And with modern editors, you can just locate those extremely fast.
Have you ever had to go back and change things, or has the system which you put in place at the start just worked completely the whole time?
Mostly it worked. Obviously, I've gone back to the engine side and stuff, but the global organization of things really didn't change a lot. I've done some improvements, like in Tome, you have the game world is split in many different zones, and each zone is very specific and isolated piece of code, if you wish, or piece of data. And for a long time, static maps definitions were in another folder, and they reference them. But then I gone back and said, okay, you can still reference them, but we can also put the map inside the zones folder and so on. So little upgrades like that, but mostly the folder structures and the file structures has been the same, and the class structure and the data inheritance is also mostly the same. So yeah, it's stood the test of time, I'd say.
What about you, Josh?
Yeah, I'd say I subscribe to the KISS principle, the keep it simple, stupid idea of I just go for the simplest possible approach I can think of to a problem, because anything that gets complex will just, with a large project especially, it'll start building on itself and getting more and more problematic. So that's one principle I like to follow. And then along with that, I tend to brute force a lot of solutions. Like even, for example, my FOV is complete brute forced Brissenham raycasting. I mean, that's nothing special. There's so many ways you can approach that. But for me, I'm using C++ too. So, it's a fast enough language to do a lot of things brute force. And so if I can do that and keep it simple, I'll be pretty happy. So that's the code part. But I actually like to write as little code as possible also to do any given thing. And so the way I manage that is I put everything I can into data or scripts, just things that are outside the engine itself, outside the code. I don't like to hard code anything. No values. All of it comes from text files. So there's a whole lot of text files that go into the project I'm working on now. Cogmind is not as many as DarkGod has yet. He's in the thousands. I don't think I've only got maybe 500. But
I'm mad too. So yeah,
that's true. And Tome has been going on forever. How many years have you been working on Tome?
I think I started in 2009.
Yeah. 7 years. Yeah. Cogmind I've been doing for about 3 years or so. So the other thing about that, 3 years, even after just a month, I might forget, what the heck I was doing or what I meant. So another really important thing thing I think is I tend to do a fair amount of commenting. I basically assume that I won't have any idea what I'm looking at when I come back and look at it, because I usually don't. So I pretend that it will be someone else. That's important. Well, what about you, Mark?
Well, as I think a lot of people know on r/roguelikes and r/roguelike devs, this gets brought up quite a lot. I do all my coding in one massive Python file. And that's basically because I don't come from a CS background at all, and this is the first game I've ever written, and I basically learned just from trying things out and just from testing whatever seemed like it might work well. And so by the time I learned that you should do stuff in lots of files, I had 50,000 lines or something in one file. And at that point I thought, well, I could spend the next few days splitting it up into files for, world gen and field of view and inventory and blah, blah, blah. Or I could spend the next week coding something else really cool. And basically every week I ask myself that kind of question, and every week the let's code something new and cool wins over the let's sort out the file argument. So at this point it has become pretty massive and pretty unwieldy, and as shocking as this is, I might actually begin a second file at some point, because now that I've reached about 450,000 files, good grief, lines, I found that sometimes the text editor I use actually crashes because of the size of the file. Which is interesting, which is a fascinating thing to discover. And it doesn't happen all that often, but it happens about, if I spend a full day coding of, say, from 9 till 9 or something, then there's probably about a 1 in 3 chance it'll crash at some point in that day. And that's not huge, and I do save often, but it's still pretty annoying. So I'm leaning towards opening a second file. So I think once I get all the AI stuff I'm doing now done, and once I move on to speech and dialect generation stuff, particularly since that'll require massive volumes of lines of text, I think I might start a second file and then just work on that new file and just make that 400,000 lines again. So that's roughly my plan, and I must be honest, I've never really, aside from this newfound crashing issue, I've never really run into many problems with it. It just keeps things in one place. I know where things are. I do, with that said, though, run into the same thing as you, Josh, that after a week or so, I completely forget whatever the hell it was I coded last week. So I don't so much comment a lot, but I try to specifically plan the development in such a way that I will never have to go back to the stuff I wrote before, and therefore I can kind of black box certain segments of the game and just look at the inputs and the outputs without having to return to some code I wrote a few months back and fiddle with it. So yeah, that's my coding practice.
But just imagine black boxing them into their own files.
I don't even understand the sentence.
Yeah, but each week you think, I have more fun stuff to do. Each week you add code, and so each week it gets harder for you to split it up.
It does, absolutely.
It may be too late now for you.
It is too late.
Oh yeah, definitely too late.
So now you have one file called file 1, and you'll make a file called file 2. That's
soon
how it's organized.
Yeah,
okay,
basically. And I think it kind of fits in quite well, since I'm at roughly the 50% mark in the project. Then file 1 will be the first half of the game, and file 2 will be the second half.
Oh yeah, so you can put each of them on a separate floppy disk.
That is pretty much the plan. Yeah. So, do you comment things a lot, DarkGod, or not?
Well, it depends a lot, actually. I'm really not well known for my commenting skills usually. I try to comment the engine files, but first I probably need to explain a bit what I meant by engine, because in Tome there is like 2 engines. There is what the game calls the engine. It's like a very generic set of roguelike stuff, like defining an entity, defining a map, defining that an entity can have hit points and stuff like that, but always in a very modular manner that does not impose anything on the game itself. And then over that you have the game module, which also has some actual classes that inherit from the engine, and that will define the gameplay of the game. So when you hit, these things can happen, but always only the generic stuff. And then you have the data files. Just like Josh, who define most of the game. Yeah, everything in the game you see is actually a data file. In Tom case, both the engine, the game definitions, and the data are all in Lua. But it doesn't really matter because one is written in a class style and the other in a data style. But whatever. And I tend to try to comment and explain the functions in the core engine, if you wish, in the engines engine. As for the rest, not so much because mostly it's for me and I have a rather good memory of that. So I tend to forget about doing it. But since the engine is meant to be able to be used by other people to make completely different roguelikes, I try to at least keep a comment and a few explanations of what the parameters are in each of the functions. But I'm rather light on commenting.
Yeah, that's actually the same way that I handle it too. I mean, there's two engines. There'll be the generic, really low-level engine that could be used for any other game. And then there's the engine for the game itself, which has the logic of the game, and then all the data is on top of that. But it's two engines. So I think that if you plan on doing multiple projects, that's a really good way to approach things. Or if you plan to make your project available for others to use. I mean, I'm not doing that with Cogmind. It's not open source or really moddable, but I'm doing that with the XCOM roguelike. And when I revisit it, that's how it's going to all be designed, so that other people can take it and make their own game on the same engine.
Whereas I think again this is quite strange in that I don't have that kind of level split that you've both just said about the kind of basic engine plus the specific game engine. In that, as far as I can tell, in that I'm not a CS person, but in the URL file, as far as I can tell, these are just the same thing. In that everything is so sort of handmade that I think if you wanted to take out the specific URL stuff and use the engine of the game for something else, I don't think that you'd be able to do that because the engine is too closely tied to the content and the content to the engine. I suspect, anyway.
Do you have data files? I mean, external data, or are you really hard code a lot of that stuff?
What do you mean?
Don't lie.
Well, I mean, you have this one massive file. Is there a lot of data? I mean, there's URL specific content. Is it full as well? Oh, that's what I mean.
The single file contains everything from the engine through to the ASCII graphics and stuff. So every piece of graphical content in game is just drawn at runtime, and the whole game takes up 8 MB or something, and that's all just text. So there are no external files at all aside from DLL files and things like that, which you need to run it.
Right.
But yeah, that's all.
That's amazing.
I must say, it probably makes Josh and me giggle a bit, but I must say it's rather amazing that you actually managed to make something as big as that. Yeah, it really speaks for your talent as a coder, even though you don't have any background, as you say.
Oh, well,
and determination
thank you very much.
too.
Yeah,
determination is what I see.
Well, thank you very much.
It's rather amazing. So obviously, I'm not saying that anybody else should do the same.
Of course.
Don't misunderstand me, but yeah, congrats.
Thank you. Though,
one thing I like to point out, though, actually, that hasn't been mentioned yet, is, I mean, you started from the libtcod tutorial.
I did, yes.
Right, and that's really that's like you're like the poster child for everyone should use the libtcod tutorial. Look, it can become this if you're determined enough.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I did use that first, and then once I just gone through it once, I just tried fiddling with different things, changing colors, how much creatures spawn and so forth, and then tried to figure out some of the more kind of technical code in terms of showing the screen, showing lighting, showing field of view, this kind of stuff. And then once I had all that down, I then tried to just kind of expand it from there. Though the biggest challenge for me was learning how to do saving and loading, because you just couldn't have the kind of world map of the size I wanted if you couldn't do that, clearly. Or rather, if you couldn't chunk the game into blocks. And that was the toughest thing I ever had to learn to code, I think, so far, as that just really, really blew my mind.
Yeah. I was following that when you were developing that part, and I haven't had to do that myself before, but I've often thought about what it would be like, what would the best approaches be. I mean, and this really ties into, I guess, our topic today is also how much research did you do into this? I mean, obviously other people have approached this same topic many times before. Do you do a lot of research to see how they do it, or do you just fiddle with it in your own methods?
That's, for the most part, it was fiddling rather than research. I think I googled sort of how to save load in Python, and something suggested that shelve would be a good module. I went and found it, and then just from there, I just fiddled with it. And for quite a few weeks, I would have things where it would try to load things that weren't there, or save over things that were there, and all this kind of nonsense. But in the end, I found a fairly robust system. Again, just purely from experimentation, to make sure that it never overwrote things it shouldn't, while still making sure that only a small part of the game was ever loaded at once. So, for instance, when you step onto a new map, all the buildings are not spawned until you step in them, for instance. And that kind of method just saves time and memory space and so forth. And that, again, was just a kind of a long experiment of seeing, okay, so if I put the saving loading code here, what does that do? Okay, that does that. That's fine, but not quite perfect. If I put it here, what does that do? And a large part of my kind of first year or two of finding out how the hell you, in fact, code a game was trying to kind of fully make sense of what are the most efficient ways of doing things, what sequence should you put important lines of code in, and it has always been that more kind of low-level technical stuff I've struggled with more, whereas the creative PCG stuff has always come pretty easily to me.
Yeah, that's why I'm kind of surprised, and I think a lot of people are, that you wasn't crushed under the weight of what usually happens with a first project. You're learning those basic things, and you can't always go back and apply them to everything you've done before. So it just keeps getting heavier and heavier, and it just falls apart. I mean, I have a personal experience with that. I spent 5 years doing an SRPG, strategy RPG, before I even got into roguelikes at all. I spent 5 years of semi-full-time work working on one, and got into the beta stage. But it was actually my first major project. I'd done lots of smaller ones before that, but it was my first major project, and I had learned so much along the way that it just became such a pain to maintain all these bad decisions that I had made when I didn't know they were bad decisions. So it felt really good once I got into roguelikes. I started over completely from scratch, except I brought over my old libraries and supporting data structures and things like that that were built over time. But it was really nice to start fresh again, and then I'm back into big projects, but now I don't make those same mistakes, whereas you're still going with the same first project, which started from a tutorial.
Yep.
Don't you ever go back? And I'm curious, don't you ever go back and like find, or I guess you don't go back too much, but you might occasionally find things that you were just completely wrong. Do you have to fix them, or?
Yeah, occasionally, but far less often than it used to happen. I think it's been at least a year since I had to, in any kind of serious way, delve kind of back into the engine, saving, loading, displaying the map type code, and to fiddle with something with that, since it doesn't work as optimally as it could, but it works optimally enough, given that it's an ASCII game and that doesn't take up much runtime, and you don't need to see too much of the map at once and so forth. And I'm sure that I could, chop each tile down from taking 1 millisecond down to 0.1 or something, but I don't need to be, since it runs fast enough on every system that it wants to run on, really. So in a way, I think that's quite like what you said about sort of brute forcing things, in that I care much more about, if it works well enough, then it's done, and let's just move on, rather than let's spend a lot of time ensuring that every line of code is as slick and optimal as it can be.
Yeah, I'll concur with that. There is a saying that goes, premature optimization is the root of all evil. It's extremely true. Often you'll see novice programmers go like, but maybe we can optimize that because it will be slow. And I go like, no, you don't care. You don't actually know if this will be slow. Obviously, there are some cases like will be slow, but most of the times you just think it will be slow, and really you don't care. You do it in a simple way, and then when you test it and when you actually add a game on top of it, you see if it is slow, and then you know what to optimize. Never the other way around, because optimized code is always less readable than simple explicit code. And you want simple explicit code as much as possible. So
good point. Yeah, that's why having a good way to test the performance of your program, like down to the function level, is really important. Once it gets bigger, find those bottlenecks.
Something I found was that the biggest kind of code refactor I've done lately was in the field of view code, and that the version of the game on my website, which is nearly a year old now, just since this new version has been so massive and taken so long, you don't have a particularly huge field of view, and that's because the field of view code was just so poorly written that if you had a larger field of view, it would just slow down the game too much. And one of the first things I did on 0.8, which is the version I'm doing now, was to go back and look at it, and it was just embarrassing how bad it was. And I just realized, wow, this is just absolutely wretched. And I spent about one day and just purged it all and rewrote it, and now it's beautiful and smooth, and you can see for miles and miles around you, and it's great. But with that said, I was quite pleased in a way that the truly awful code had still held up that long, in that it was only once the game reached a certain point of detail in the world where you really needed to see a lot of it at once that it mattered, and yet the truly kind of wretched, abysmal, hacky stuff I'd written 4 years back, it had still been good enough up to the point where the game reached a stage where it just no longer was good enough.
Yeah, and that's when you optimize, exactly. And I think one other important thing is that you want to not over-optimize things at the start. But the thing you want to do is when you make a new system, or like the FOV or whatever, you don't optimize it, but you think, what if I add to optimize it? And thus you try to make it as self-contained and with an interface as simple as possible. So when you need to change it, replace it, optimize it, whatever, you can keep the same interface and just change the code inside, so you don't have to rewrite your whole game. Obviously, it won't always be possible, but it's a good thing to strive for.
Interesting, and that segues quite well into my next query, which is what kinds of techniques do you use for bug fixing and for bug hunting? Do you have some sort of default background debugging thing which keeps track of which functions are being called, or something else?
In my case, I rely almost, let's see, there's three parts to this, I guess. I mean, I have my engine itself has a multi-level error reporting system, which is pretty common. You run this in most any kind of software or game, where just you can throw different levels of warnings. One is just a warning, one is an error, something is seriously wrong, you need to address this, and one is like a fatal error that the game got some data it didn't expect. And those I put in manually when I think something needs to be checked for so-called sanity, and that's at the basic level. But obviously, you can't think of everything. The bugs that really bother you are the ones that you didn't think of, obviously. So yeah, in terms of those, I have a library, a very simple library that works under Windows, where if it crashes for me, or even on a remote computer, one of the players is playing and it crashes, it produces the exact stack trace. I know you can do this in Python quite easily. With C++, it's not always as obvious. So I had found a library of someone who managed to, I'm not an amazing coder. Someone else who's much better than me managed to do this, and so I was able to use this piece of their code, and it's just amazing. I can get a stack trace from anywhere else, and even people are running Wine, running my game in Wine on Linux or on any other PC. All I need is that file. And now like Cogmind players can opt in to upload that file if their game crashes. So I'll have that file, which gives me the stack trace, which is almost always enough to solve any problem. I mean, because if I see where the game crashed, I can guess why it might have crashed there. And even if I can't, I can then put a sanity check on the values that might not have had one or whatnot. But that's a really big thing. But most of these bugs actually don't make it to the players because I use automated testing, which I've talked about on Roguelike Dev, the subreddit, a lot and many times before. We do. If you're interested in development, by the way, I could mention stop by the Roguelike Dev subreddit and check out our FAQ Friday series. Every other week, we talk about these different topics, and one of them it was about testing in particular. What I use is automated testing, where basically the game plays itself just again repeatedly, and not even just repeatedly, but I'll open 4 instances of the game, one for each core on my computer, and let it play all night. I do this for several days before a new release, and if it crashes or if it throws any kind of errors or whatever, all these things, as these happen, I can fix them. Each release that goes out, there's only been, maybe 1 or 2 major crash bugs in each one. And, I can put out a hot fix for those right away. And so I think if you can make your game play itself, then you're well on your way towards having a pretty bug-free experience.
That's a really intriguing model. I mean, presumably you had to write some kind of AI to play the game for you?
Sort of. What I did, but it doesn't require much AI because when you're developing a roguelike, it's a really good idea to have, the player and the actors or whatever you call them, the entities, the mobs, make them all, they're all the same entity. They're the same code. They just have different instructions, AI instructions or player instructions. And so if you just give the player, the code for an average entity and have it play, then, it can't do all the same things a player would do for sure. But if you introduce randomness, I mean, there's just so much, you just make it do random things and it can catch most things. So for my previous game, another game I was working on, I did actually do that. I developed a full AI for the player as well. And it would do things that the player might do, all of that. But I haven't done that with Cogmind because it would be overkill. There isn't quite enough. It's just not necessary. But it catches almost everything by just having all the AIs doing their thing. The thing about Cogmind is it's different from a lot of roguelikes in that most roguelikes are, you are the player and you meet these monsters and you're their enemy and that's it. Well, in Cogmind, everybody it's similar, I guess, to, the same as in URR, whereas it's a living world. And so all of the entities, they have relationships with each other. They can kill each other. They can befriend each other. They can do all these other things that you can do. And so if all I have to do is just let them do their thing, then, obviously I'll help them do their thing. For example, I'll say, okay, I'm going to introduce 200 bad guys to this one area. Well, that changes the whole dynamics and it finds all the possible bugs really, or all the really rare bugs that somebody might hit, once in a blue moon, when you have thousands of these guys fighting and doing their own standard routines, their AI behavior basically, and all kinds of different things. It hits all the main important parts of the game logic. And so I didn't do anything special for the AI. I might do that eventually for fun, but I don't have time for fun stuff right now. I just have no time for fun stuff. And not at this stage of development, I can only do the things that have to be done at this stage. That's my method, automated testing. What about you, DarkGod?
I'm afraid I can't really do automated testing. I suppose I could if I spent enough time for it, but just like you, I just don't have enough time for that. And given the number of things and items and pieces and so on and whatever that can happen in Tom, it would really be a massive AI to be able to test everything. So I can't really do much automated testing. But I have something like Josh said about the automated reports. If the game detects a Lua error, it will pop a little box to the player showing the stack trace, and they can enter a few lines of text to say, "Oh, I was doing that," or whatever happened, and then send the report. There is also some specific cases that are automatically monitored and sent without having to ask the player, because I know where those can come from. So that's for the automated report at the engine level. And then, mostly it's actually playing and playtesting the things I'm making that help me find the bugs. I know it's a bit old school, but it seems to work, mostly probably because everything is rather well separated. And when I change something, I know if it will have a side effect something or somewhere or not. Obviously, I can be wrong, and I'm wrong numerous times, but in the majority of cases, I'm not. So it kind of works. And one of the big advantages of having the engine itself in Lua is that I've made myself a debug window. Where I can inspect any Lua values, so I can inspect anything in the game, and I can modify it and enter any random Lua code I want, which help me debug and find quickly what's going wrong.
That's pretty close, I think, to what I do, in that I don't have any kind of AI or any kind of play testing system. I try to test every permutation I can think of myself, but then beyond that, past a certain point, you just have to release it and just hope that someone will, by the 1 in 1,000 chance, find some deeply weird thing. Like for the previous release, there was one where someone reported that they managed to climb up onto the walls of a city, and I thought that was completely impossible because since you can't climb walls and walls don't have ramps and things, and so I thought, how on earth could that take place? And so I asked them, and they sent me some screenshots and things, and I found out that this incredibly obscure sort of nexus of things had to happen for this to take place, and what had happened was that they had found a district at the edge of a city, so it only had one gate to another district on one edge, and the other 3 edges were just pure wall without a gate in them. And this had been a district which was a religious district, which is super rare, and most times in the whole world, only 3 or 4 religious districts will spawn. Plus, a river had been going through that district, which had changed how the roads within that district had generated. And what that meant was that a bit of code that was meant to stop roads going too close to the wall had been superseded by the river code, but only because it was an edge district and a religious district. And what that meant was that one piece of road had kept going, had hit a wall, had gone vertically up the wall, and then continued to go across the top of the wall. And since road can be climbed, in air quotes, since it's not brick wall, the person playing this game had found this road going vertically upwards and had just climbed up the road wall and thereby made it on top of the city walls. And I think that one was the most absurd bug I think I've seen, in that it wasn't a crash bug clearly, but it was just such a bizarre 1 in a million confluence of things that I could just never have ever predicted that something that strange would happen. Or even if it had, I don't think I would have thought, oh wait, that'll let you get on the walls because you can climb up the vertical road, because I don't think of road as being a terrain that you can climb, and therefore I hadn't explicitly said you can't climb road. Yeah, very strange, very strange.
Those are the ones you really need the players for.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
I was gonna say, I mean, automated testing is great. I like it, but I won't claim that it solves everything. And especially, it's good for detecting things, crashes, like I was talking about. And those are the serious ones. You really don't want the game to crash on players. And so that's the stuff to get rid of first. But what about the things that don't crash the game? Well, that's the stuff that you need a lot of eyes to find.
Yeah, that's where you say you're running the game on each of your cores. I'm running the game on each of my players.
You have more players than I have cores, yes.
I hope so, yeah.
You have more. You probably have more players than like a server farm.
Yeah. No, during the release of Embers of Rage, I had over 1,200 players at the same time. So yeah, multiple cores.
Exactly.
Nice. I think also one maybe quite UR specific issue I've run into is that the overwhelming majority of bugs are not crash bugs, but they are when something looks wrong. So when you look at a PCG vase and the shading's wrong or something. And that doesn't crash it, clearly, and it's not something that you can really make a system that will look at it and say, hang on, the shadow on this PCG object is completely wrong. As clear as that's a very kind of human psychology thing. So to an extent, I think at least I found that there's a pretty big aspect of just I need to look through it, and I need to get lots of eyes on it who can see, hey Mark, I found a bug here, I think, since this door didn't have the right shade of wood for this particular climate zone. Oh yes, of course it didn't, silly me. And I don't think I can make an AI that would notice that somehow.
Yeah, well, that's a good point you make too about, I mean, it's this is really an issue with roguelikes because there's a lot of, especially with URR, because there's just so many procedurally generated things. I mean, all this content that's procedurally generated that, I mean, you don't have this problem with normal games where it's designed, perhaps, you know, and you can have QA go in and play a bunch of guys playing the game, they find things that are obviously wrong and you fix them all and there's no more. Well, with procedural content, it might appear only occasionally or, rarely, like you've found.
Exactly, yeah. And I do quite enjoy getting bug reports for the weirder ones, like the wall up the wall one. And there was also one a while back I got where someone had gone into a house and the interior of the house had been missing its back wall. And he tried walking through into the kind of yawning black void within the house and had then been teleported into the ocean. So that was a fascinating bug, I thought. And that one was, again, a kind of 1 in 10,000 confluence of factors. And that one, again, maybe an AI could have got that one, but with that said, if I had written an AI to look into houses, I don't think I would have written something that could check, does this house have all four walls, or does it border on the endless abyss? So that kind of thing, you do just have to have human eyes saying, hang on, I thought there should be a wall there, not the edge of reality. Maybe that's a bug.
Yeah, you can't really code for everything. And the main point is, even if you could, you probably don't want to spend all that time doing it, because then you'll end up with a game that can't bug, but that has just no gameplay. So
yeah, exactly. I think there is some kind of tense line between the more that you restrict the PCG systems, the less buggy it'll be, of course, but then the less interest you'll get out of it in the end, really.
Yeah.
So there's some kind of tension there, I think, in Alpha Games, which kind of segues quite well, perhaps, into the next one, which is clearly Tome is open source, whereas Cogmind is not, but the XCOM is, yes, or will be?
No, not actually. I mean, it's XCOM is the XCOM roguelike or XATCOM, whatever you want to call it. It's not open source, but it's highly moddable.
Moddable,
it's
yes.
Made to be, yes, it's made to be extremely moddable. I mean, the engine is closed. It's the way I build the game, and that all the data is open, and you can even script in new rules. You can make a whole new game. I mean, people have done full conversions into completely different games. I mean, yeah, they're still based on like a TU system, but other than that, I mean, they turn XCOM from a game about fighting aliens to a game where you can pilot mechs and blow up buildings and stuff. So yeah, it's highly moddable, and the future version will take that even a step further. But with Cogmind, it's closed source.
Gotcha.
And even closed data. I mean, I think that's kind of an interesting aspect with roguelikes is, certain roguelikes keep their data closed because, you want to have secrets, right? I mean, a game that has its data open, anybody can find all the secrets too easily. I mean, sure, you can try and rip a closed source game apart and find its secrets, but you won't necessarily find everything, and you won't find it quickly. That's for sure. So at least for now,
you will on the wikis.
Yeah, exactly. It's true. I mean, if once someone has discovered it, for example, there's a lot of things already in Cogmind that people haven't discovered. Plenty of things that no one's seen and they're not on the wikis. So, and because I don't like to spoil the game, I don't talk about any of that stuff. I don't even talk about the basic stuff you can see. So
yeah, exactly. I mean, that's very much why I keep URR closed source and closed data. In that, in the next kind of year or so, when the main quest begins to emerge, it is basically a quest about secrets, broadly speaking. And so if you can just look in the code and see, oh, right, I see, I need to go and get this thing from here, then that just kind of breaks it quickly. But the kind of query, I guess, that I was trying to segue into here is, do you think that there are major differences in how you should code or how you should think about how you code when you're trying to code for open source or for modability or for many people, or is it just broadly kind of extension of good coding practice, i.e. using lots of files and commenting often?
It's probably a little different, but good code practice goes a long way to make things modable if you want them and so on. It also probably depends a lot on what kind of engine and language and whatever you use. Like in Tom's case, the engine and the game being both written in Lua, it just makes it very easy for me to support mods and add-ons. Obviously, I had to make up some systems to handle very specific cases, but the engine being able to load code is a big help from the start. I just wanted to come back a little to the hiding of secrets, though. And obviously, I don't agree. There are things in Tome that are plainly written in the data files and the code. I have one in particular, which obviously I won't mention for secrets. But that I don't think anybody found it yet, and yet it's playing out in the open. Yeah, so
Interesting.
or maybe somebody found it because they found it in the game, but I never actually saw anybody speak about it or mention it or saw it in a chart dump online or whatever. So I'm not sure it's really efficient to actively try to hide stuff. Because I go from the idea that people that want to be spoiled will always be spoiled. They will find a way. And in the most extreme cases, if they want to be spoiled and can't, they may just go away because that's not what they wanted. So and people that don't really want to be spoiled just won't go looking for it, and it won't bother them that. It's all written in plain text in the data files because they probably don't have the technical knowledge to even open the renamed zip files that I'm using to contain the data or whatever. They just won't bother because they don't want to. So yeah, they are humans, and I just let them do what they wish. And if they want to spoil the game for themselves, they can. I just don't really care, even though I do have some secrets that are fun to find. But
that's a very
that's
intriguing
a good point.
Yeah.
In my case, with getting sidetracked maybe, but I think this is important because it does tie in with code. I mean, hiding it doesn't necessarily, take all that much effort. Like in my case, it's just a switch to whether or not to encrypt the data files, because all my files are still external data files, and I just flip the switch when I want to do a release. And before the release, they're unencrypted, so I can just work directly in the files. But I've encountered some of exactly what you were just saying there about even some players who are like, well, if I can't cheat yet, or if it's not that easy, I think I'll just wait, until there's a wiki, and that's somebody who's not playing because of that, for that exact reason. I've been emailed about that before. And so, my current idea is, because there's alpha players who are really interested in learning this stuff gradually. They don't want to be spoiled. People are happy that there's no spoilers being untagged or not tagged as such on the forums. So my current thought is to at least, throughout this entire first year or two, is to keep it under wraps. And then once everything starts to come out, for the people who really want to dive into actual files and find stuff, then I'll open it all up for that, or at least most of it. There's some secrets that I really, really deep secrets that I'd like to stay secret for a long time. Maybe I'd keep that close, but yeah.
This is a really intriguing point, I think, in that, well, firstly, DarkGod, I think that now that you said that, everyone who hears this episode will now go and search it out, clearly. But
I wish them good luck because there is a lot of data in Tome, and I didn't even say if it's in Tome or if it's in one of the expansions. So
That's true. I think almost what I'm hearing from both of you is almost a concern about losing players by restricting things. And clearly I think this to an extent goes back to the fact that clearly that both Cogmind and Tome are commercial products with which you make your living, and mine's not, clearly. And so on some level I don't really mind if someone comes along and thinks, I can't be spoiled, this game sucks, then fine, they can piss off, I really don't care. And I'm sure I would feel differently, of course, if I was trying to make a living from it, but because I do have slightly more sort of not purist objectives, but more just I don't have to be concerned about that objective of making sure that people who would otherwise play it, but they won't play it because of X, I don't have to be concerned by those groups of players because I just don't really mind if they play or not. But in terms of keeping the secret stuff secret, I guess, I think searching for the secret within a 500,000 line file is going to be fairly difficult, and I feel pretty confident that merely the kind of absurd monolithic nature of the file will keep things hidden. Indeed, in a previous version, I know that someone tried to extract the Python file back out of the .exe file, and they couldn't because it was too big, and the piece of software that they were using to extract it just crashed in the process, which was extremely funny and vaguely gratifying as well. So, in a way, having one or maybe two, having one or maybe two colossal files in a peculiar, sort of slightly perverse way serves as its own security method by itself, because no one is going to want to ever deal with that kind of nonsense. But I think secrets, you should try to keep secrets in there, even those which are not necessarily found by the wiki. I mean, to me, and I do talk about Dark Souls a lot, but it's the best game ever made, most likely, at least until I'm finished it is. And to me, for those who played Dark Souls, when you find Ash Lake, which is this hidden area, which I found myself without going on the wiki, that was just the most amazing thing, I think, that I've experienced in games in the last, 10 years or something. Because I found it myself, and because it's not super hard to find, but it's such a kind of visually and thematically striking area, which causes the player to rethink everything they think they know about the world they're playing in and the plot and the lore of that world. Just the fact that there was nothing there to lure me towards it, and the fact that I could have gone online and found it, of course, but I didn't, was just such an amazing moment. And I think people who spoil themselves, yes, clearly they have the right to do so and so forth, but I think having stuff in there that either you can't spoil yourself on, or that the players of the game have to work together as a team to find, or that's so obscure that it'll be months or years until someone finds it, I think all that type of stuff is really good, and to me, being able to hide that kind of stuff in your code somewhere, whether it's through the massive file method, as I call it, or not, I think is really important. The MFM, I should copyright that, as the massive file method of secret hiding.
Yeah, I understand what you say. I was playing World of Warcraft for a long time. Actually, technically, I'm still ham, but whatever. And I remember at the start, like in 2004 or 5, I didn't read any online spoilers, any online guides or whatever, mainly because there weren't. And I was like level 20 or 30 and just not at the end game, nothing, but I just go on, read my quest and discovered things. And sometimes I saw a mountain and said, I'll go check out what's in this mountain. There was nothing telling me to go there, but it just looked cool, and I got there and was like, whoa, there is a raptors there or whatever. And this sense of discovery is very great, and it is a bit lost in nowadays games gaming area because of wikis and because of spoilers and everything. And while I do find it saddening, I don't want to go against my time. This is how things work now. There are wikis, there are spoilers, there are debugging tools if people want to go in Cogmind and get the encryption key to decrypt the data or whatever. I don't know how it works, but there is obviously a way to do it. Yeah. So trying to stop that doesn't seem worth it to me. And it's not really on the side of trying to not piss off one or two people to get one or two sales more. Truthfully, a few more sales or not doesn't change my life at all. But it's more from a side of I'm giving a game to players, and I want them to have fun. That's my end game for me. When somebody writes to me and say your game is so fun, I love it. That's when I'm the happiest. And if they go to this point by playing, trying to avoid spoilers, that's fine. And if they go to this point by spoiling the hell out of them, and because they prefer to enjoy the pure mechanic, tactical side or whatever, that's fine to me too. As long as they're having fun with my game, I'm happy.
Interesting.
Yep, good points.
To conclude, I thought that given that on r/roguelike dev and so forth, there are a lot of people right now, I think, who are engaging on some fairly big new projects. So I thought, given that we all have pretty big projects, what kind of essential tips would you give for someone wanting to code a massive game, aside from don't code it all in one file?
Well, don't
That's your
put it
tip,
in
right?
all one file. That's something that bears repeating, I think. I would say the same thing I'm saying to every people that asked me is that if you know you want to make something big, make something small, but plan for something big. Like when I started Tome, the current version, I did get something playable in less than 1 week, and that included having made the engine from scratch with it and all. So I do have lots of coding experience, so I was probably faster than somebody starting. But the thing stays. When I made the engine, I was like, okay, I will make this part and this part because I needed to do a little game, nothing very great. You could just run around a little dungeon and slay dragons by hitting them once or something stupid. But at least you got something going. While I was doing that, making this very small thing, I knew that I wanted to be able to add this kind of system to be able to split in multiple zones and everything. So I did some things that would not make sense for a small game, but I did them because I knew where I wanted to go. And that's very important, I think, to not have to rewrite everything later. It probably does require some previous experience in coding and probably in game making too. But the biggest point is try to start small. Even if you actually fail to transform your small game to a big one, and I won't lie, it will probably happen, or at least it may happen. It won't be a lost experience because next time you'll have seen what are the pitfalls, and you can probably do it better and do it right this time. But start small. There is nothing more important, I think, because if you want to add everything now, you're sure to get lost unless you're Mark. But,
I was just about to say, now that DarkGod has said there's nothing else more important, I can't go and say there's something else more important. But actually, when Mark asked the question, that was going to be my first reply too, is to start small. But while we're on the trend of saying things, of telling people to not do things like Mark,
don't listen to them. Don't listen to them. It's all lies. It's all lies.
Don't expect that your first project will become that big major project, because if you keep, have realistic expectations, because if you start thinking that, and you're probably going to be disappointed. You might not be disappointed. Most developers who go down that path will just end up, you have to finish, you have to make this your big project, and you'll waste years working on it. I've done this myself, so I know. But you will end up wasting so much time. Don't do that. I mean, start small, like our DarkGod says. Prototype. The 7-day RL is great for this. I mean, to see if an idea works, in a small scope. Cogmind was a 7-day RL, 4 years ago. That was just a really quick way to get it in there to see if the core mechanic worked. It turns out it did. I didn't really plan on making it into a full game, actually, but that's a different story. But the idea is to start small and prototype and just make a small game that works. And, if it works, keep building on it. If it doesn't, well, maybe think about starting over, or, think about what went wrong and start over with, what you've learned from that. So start small and keep realistic expectations of what you can do based on what what you're capable of, your experience.
I'd just like to add something to what Josh said. 7-day RLs, for example, are very, very good to indeed test gameplay ideas and such. But I don't think you should rely on them to test more the coding side.
Oh, for sure.
When I was saying you start small but you plan big, you just can't do that for 7D RL because you just have 7 days, and you won't make good code, good expandable code in this case. You could, but that's really not what the event is trying to promote.
Right, that's true. So yeah, in the coding, on the coding side, it's not a good idea. From the design side, that's
for design, it's very good, but for coding, just make your own thing and see how it goes.
Well, I feel compelled to offer some slightly different advice.
Of course you do.
So here we go. I think that there's some wisdom in some situations for starting small, of course, but at the same time, I think I would never have got to where I was now if I had allowed myself to do something small first. I think I would have got bored or lost interest quite quickly. It was the scope and the ambition which really kept me going and really kept me wanting to learn how to code. But with that said, if you are one of the people on r/roguelike dev, or if you're listening to this now and you think, yes, I'd like to do a massive project, I must say it will take a long time because I've been coding about 5 years now. It's about halfway finished. And yes, I did have a lot of other things on the go at the same time, like a PhD and other such transient distractions. But it will take you a hugely long time to make something massive. And if you're okay with that, and you do feel that you have an idea which is kind of big and fresh and different enough to merit that kind of time investment, then I think that's fine. But with that said, the roguelike world is kind of littered with people who say, yes, I shall make the next big game, and it will have everything from farming to space travel in it. And then 6 months later they say, oh, forget this, I'm going on holiday. Not to reference any particular game or any particular Kickstarter when I say that. So you should be aware of just how long it takes to make a huge game, but you shouldn't let that discourage you, I think, if you do have something really bold and crazy in mind. That's all. I'm done now. I'm done.
I completely agree. You want to have ambition if you want to make something big. You have to want it, and you have to know it will take a lot of time. In just the little anecdote for all the timers of the old RGR or whatever, the old news group of
RGR,
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And there was this guy, I think he was Shockfrost.
Oh
that's the famous one.
Yeah, he just kept on posting, I'll make the best game, it will have everything inside and it will be great. And obviously he never produced anything. I'm not saying he wasn't a good coder, or I have no idea, but it always just seemed he had far too much things he wanted to put in his game to ever actually be able to make the game.
Yeah, it even has its own Rogue Basin entry, that incident, I believe.
Yeah, the Shockfrost incident.
Yes, the Shockfrost incident.
How ominous, my goodness. Well, that's all splendid. Thank you all very much. I think we will wrap up here. So thank you to my guests, and hopefully this has been at least somewhat useful to those of you thinking of embarking on your massive world-changing 10-year projects or your small 7-week experimental projects. So thank you all for listening, and thank you to my guests, and good night.
Goodbye.
Yep. Good night, everybody. Thanks for having us.
The show has collapsed. Would you like your podcasts identified?